They say behind every successful man is a woman. But in Marcus Thorne's case, the woman wasn't just behind him. She owned the ground he stood on. When Marcus handed his wife, Viviane, divorce papers on their 10th anniversary to be with his young, ambitious mistress, he thought he was cutting loose a dead weight. He thought he was the king of his business empire. He was wrong. He didn't realize that his entire CEO title was merely a designated role granted by a silent partner he had long forgotten. This is the story of how a cheating husband lost everything in a single courtroom heartbeat. The champagne in the crystal flute had gone flat, much like the marriage sitting heavily at the table. Marcus Thorne checked his Rolex for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. It was a Submariner, a gift from his wife, Viviane, 5 years ago, when Thorne Logistics had finally broken the billion-dollar valuation mark. He didn't look at Viviane, though. He was looking past her, toward the entrance of the Gilded Lily, the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, where the maitre d' knew everyone's net worth before they even checked their coats. "You haven't touched your sea bass," Marcus said, his voice devoid of warmth. It was a statement, not a concern. Vivian Thorne sat with her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress, elegant but understated, blending into the plush velvet booth. She had always been like that, quiet, blending in, the soft shadow to Marcus's blinding spotlight. "I'm not hungry, Marcus," she said softly. "Happy anniversary." Marcus sighed, a sharp exhale through his nose that signaled his patience was at an end. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke Italian suit. He didn't pull out a jewelry box. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with the insignia of Vanguard & Croft, the city's most aggressive divorce firm. He slid it across the white tablecloth, pushing aside the centerpiece of white roses. "We need to stop pretending, Viviane," Marcus said, his tone shifting to the practiced cadence he used in boardrooms. "This isn't working. It hasn't worked for years. I've outgrown this arrangement." Viviane looked at the envelope, then up at him. Her expression didn't crumble. There were no tears, no hysterics, which irritated Marcus. He had prepared a speech to counter her crying. "An arrangement," she repeated. "Is that what 10 years is to you?" "I'm a different man than I was when we met," Marcus said, straightening his tie. "I run a global empire. I need a partner who reflects that vitality, someone who can keep up with the public image of Thorne Logistics. You prefer to stay home and read. You're invisible, Viviane." "Invisibility has its uses," she murmured, almost to herself. "I'm generous," Marcus continued, ignoring her. "The prenuptial agreement we signed is ironclad, as you know. You get the townhouse in Connecticut and a monthly stipend for 5 years. It's more than enough for a simple life. But I am keeping the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and of course the company. The company is mine. My blood, sweat, and tears built it." Viviane reached out and touched the envelope. "And Jessica?" Marcus froze. "Excuse me." "Jessica Vance," Viviane said, her voice steady. "Your new vice president of marketing, 26 years old, top of her class at Wharton. She prefers rubies to diamonds and has a distinct laugh that carries across a room. You've been sleeping with her for 8 months." Marcus's face hardened. He dropped the pretense of politeness. "She understands me. She understands the business. She's waiting at the bar, actually. I wanted to do this cleanly so she and I could celebrate." The audacity hung in the air like a foul smell. He had brought his mistress to their anniversary dinner. Viviane picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. She simply weighed it in her hand. You are leaving me for her because you think she is an asset to your future, and I am a relic of your past. I'm leaving you because I'm the king of this city, Viviane, and a king needs a queen, not a ghost." Viviane stood up. For the first time, Marcus noticed that her eyes weren't sad. They were cold, like the deepest part of the ocean where the light doesn't reach. "Very well, Marcus," she said. "If you want a war, I suggest you read the fine print of your life, not just the prenup." "Is that a threat?" Marcus scoffed. "You have no lawyers. You have no money of your own. You have nothing but what I give you." "Enjoy your dinner," Viviane said. She placed the unopened envelope back on the table, right next to the cold sea bass. "And tell Jessica that the red dress she's wearing clashes with the upholstery in the penthouse. She should really check the lighting before she moves in." Viviane turned and walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. Marcus watched her go, a flicker of unease twisting in his gut, but he quickly shoved it down. He waved his hand, signaling the waiter, and then motioned toward the bar where a stunning woman in a crimson dress was waiting. He had won. He was free. He owned the world. Or so he thought. 3 days later, the locks on the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue were changed. Not by Marcus, but by Jessica. Viviane had expected this. She stood in the hallway, watching as movers hauled her boxes toward the freight elevator. She hadn't fought for the furniture or the art. She had packed only her personal clothes and a small, heavy, fireproof safe she kept in the back of her closet. Jessica Vance stood in the doorway, sipping a green juice, leaning against the frame with a smirk that looked surgically permanent. "It's awkward, isn't it?" Jessica said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "But Marcus really needs the space to be modernized. We're thinking of an open concept. All these walls just make things feel closed in." Viviane looked at the young woman. Jessica was beautiful, objectively, but she had the hungry look of someone who had never been full. "Be careful with the load-bearing walls, Jessica," Viviane said calmly. "Remove the wrong one, and the whole ceiling comes down on your head." Jessica laughed. "Marcus said you were quaint. He says you still use a flip phone." "It's encrypted," Viviane said, something Marcus never understood the value of. Just then, Marcus stormed out of the home office, a Bluetooth headset blinking in his ear. He looked stressed. "I don't care what the supplier says. Tell them Thorn Logistics will pull the contract if they don't lower the shipping rates by 15%. He tapped the headset off and looked at Viviane. "You're still here? The movers should have been done an hour ago." "I'm just leaving, Marcus," Viviane said. "Good. Look, my lawyers will be in touch about the final signing. Don't make this difficult, Viviane. I have the best legal team in the state. Don't waste your stipend fighting a battle you can't win." Viviane adjusted her coat. "Marcus, do you remember who funded the initial startup capital for Thorn Logistics back in 2015? Marcus rolled his eyes. "We took a loan. I paid it back with interest 3 years later." "Why?" "And the patent for the algorithmic routing software, the Thorn 9 system that made the company profitable." "I developed that," Marcus snapped. "It's my code." "You wrote the interface," Viviane corrected gently. "The back-end architecture. That was complex." "What is your point? You typed up some notes for me. Do you want a secretary's wage? Is that it?" He laughed, wrapping an arm around Jessica. "She wants a bonus for typing, Jess." Jessica giggled. "Cute." Viviane stared at them. It was almost fascinating how blind arrogance could make a person. Marcus truly believed the myth of his own creation. He had forgotten the late nights where he had fallen asleep, and Viviane had taken the laptop, rewriting his sloppy, broken code into a masterpiece of logistical efficiency. He had forgotten that the loan came from a shell company she had set up with her inheritance, money she never told him the full extent of because he had a gambling problem in his 20s. He remembered the glory. He forgot the architect. "I don't want a bonus, Marcus," Vivian said, picking up her small, fireproof safe. "I just want you to remember this moment, the moment you had the chance to be kind, and you chose to be cruel." "Get out," Marcus said, turning his back on her. "I have a board meeting to prepare for. We're going public with the new expansion in Europe next month. I don't have time for nostalgia." Vivian walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw Marcus and Jessica already looking at color swatches for the walls, erasing her existence from the penthouse. She took her phone out of her pocket. It was, indeed, an older model, rugged and secure. She dialed a number that wasn't saved in her contacts because she had memorized it a decade ago. "This is Sterling," she said into the phone. Her voice was no longer soft or submissive. It was the voice of a commander. A deep, gravelly voice answered on the other end. "Miss Sterling, we haven't heard from you in quite some time. Is the sleeper protocol still in effect?" "No," Vivian said, watching the numbers on the elevator tick down. "The sleeper protocol is deactivated. Initiate Operation Glass House." "Understood. Shall we freeze the assets?" "Not yet," Vivian said, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "Let him run. Let him feel powerful. I want him to extend himself as far as possible. When he stands before the judge, I want him to believe he owns the sky. It will make the fall so much more devastating." "And the mistress?" the voice asked. "She likes open concepts," Vivian said. "Let's see how she likes being exposed to the elements." She stepped out into the bustling New York street. A black town car was waiting for her, not a taxi, but a private moire with tinted windows. The driver, a large man named Arthur, who had served her family for 30 years, opened the door. "Where to, Miss Sterling?" "The Vanguard Legal Group offices, Arthur. I have a meeting with Judge Halloway's private counsel." "Very good, ma'am." As the car pulled away, Vivian didn't look back at the penthouse towering above. She opened the fireproof safe on her lap. Inside lay a single, leather-bound document titled The Sterling Trust, Deed of Assignment and Intellectual Property Retention. On the bottom line, signed in 2015, was Marcus's signature. He had signed it during a flurry of paperwork when the company was founding, too drunk on champagne and success to read the text. He thought it was a tax formality. It wasn't. It was a leash. And Vivian had just decided to yank it. 2 months passed. To the outside world, Marcus Thorne was living the dream. Thorne Logistics was trending in every financial magazine. He was on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The Man Who Moves the World." Jessica was on his arm at every gala, wearing diamonds that had been purchased with company credit cards, categorized under client relations. But inside the glass walls of his office, the temperature was dropping. "What do you mean we can't expand to Germany?" Marcus roared, slamming his hand on the mahogany desk. His chief financial officer, a nervous man named Timothy, wiped sweat from his brow. "It's the licensing, sir. The European Trade Commission blocked the expansion." "Why? We pass all regulations." "It's not the regulations, sir," Timothy stammered. "It's the intellectual property rights. The German authorities received a cease and desist regarding the Thorne 9 algorithm." "I own the algorithm," Marcus shouted. "Well, that's what I told them. But they said the IP holder has flagged the expansion as unauthorized use. They're demanding a review of the ownership structure." Marcus paced the room like a peeved tiger. "Who is the IP holder?" "It's Thorne Logistics," I am Thorn." "Technically, sir," Timothy said, looking at his tablet, "the IP is leased to Thorn Logistics by a holding entity called the Sterling Trust." Marcus froze. The name sounded vaguely familiar, like a dream he had forgotten. Sterling? That sounds like some generic offshore bank. Just pay them off. How much do they want? They don't want money, sir. They simply denied the request. And, Timothy hesitated. And what? And the bank called this morning. The line of credit for the new warehouse in New Jersey. It's been frozen. Frozen? I have perfect credit. The guarantor pulled their backing. Marcus felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. He grabbed his jacket. Fix it. I don't care how. Bribe someone. I'm going to court. My wife, my ex-wife, is dragging her feet on the divorce settlement, and I need to end this so I can focus. He stormed out of the building. He didn't connect the dots. He was too arrogant to see that the Sterling Trust and his wife's maiden name, Vivian Sterling, were the same. He had never called her by her maiden name. To him, she had only existed once she became a thorn. He arrived at the courthouse with Jessica. She was wearing a white suit, trying to look judicial and innocent. "Don't worry, baby," Jessica whispered, checking her reflection in her phone. "We'll crush her. She's probably broke by now. She'll take the first offer you give her just to buy cat food." They entered the courtroom. It was a private hearing, presided over by Judge Holloway, a stern man with a reputation for zero tolerance for nonsense. Vivian was already there. She sat at the defendant's table. But she wasn't alone. She wasn't sitting with a public defender or a family friend. Surrounding her were 4 lawyers in charcoal grey suits. They sat with the predatory stillness of sharks. On the table in front of them were stacks of files, perfectly organized. Marcus faltered for a step. He recognized the man sitting closest to Vivian. It was Arthur Penhaligon, the senior partner at Vanguard Legal, the most expensive corporate litigator in New York. Penhaligon didn't do divorces. He did corporate mergers and hostile takeovers. "What is this?" Marcus hissed to his own lawyer, a strip mall divorce attorney named Barry, who suddenly looked very out of his depth. "I don't know," Barry whispered. "That's Penhaligon. He charges $5,000 an hour." Marcus walked to his seat. "It's a bluff," he muttered. "She's spending her last dime to scare me." Vivian didn't look at him. She was reading a document, looking bored. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Holloway entered. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the 2 parties. "We are here for the dissolution of the marriage between Marcus Thorn and Vivian Thorn, and the division of assets." "Your Honor," Marcus stood up, flashing his charming smile. "This should be simple. We have a prenuptial agreement. I am willing to honor it, despite my wife's difficult behavior." "The prenuptial agreement," Judge Holloway repeated, looking at a paper. "Yes. Mr. Penhaligon, do you contest the prenup?" Arthur Penhaligon stood up. He didn't smile. "No, Your Honor. We are perfectly happy with the prenuptial agreement. It states that each party leaves the marriage with the assets they brought into it, and any assets solely in their name." Marcus smirked at Jessica. "Easy. However," Penhaligon continued, his voice filling the room like thunder, "the dispute today is regarding the definition of assets. Mr. Thorn has listed Thorn Logistics and all its subsidiaries as his personal property. We are here to correct that clerical error." "Error?" Marcus laughed, ignoring Barry's attempt to shush him. "I built that company from the ground up. It bears my name." Penhaligon opened a leather folder. "It bears your name, Mr. Thorn, Like a stadium bears the name of a sponsor, but you do not own the stadium. Penhaligon walked toward the judge, handing him a thick document. This is the founding charter of Thorn Logistics from 2015, Penhaligon said. And this is the intellectual property assignment deed. You will note that the proprietary algorithm, the Thorn 9, which accounts for 90% of the company's value, is the sole property of the Sterling Trust. So what? Marcus snapped. I'm the CEO. And who, Penhaligon asked, turning to face Marcus, is the sole beneficiary and executor of the Sterling Trust? Marcus looked at Viviane. She finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp, amused, and terrifyingly clear. I am, Viviane said softly. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The silence in courtroom 4B was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, the kind of silence that precedes a structural collapse. Marcus Thorn stared at his wife, his ex-wife, as if she had suddenly grown a second head. He laughed, a dry, cracking sound. That's ridiculous. You? You're a librarian at heart, Viviane. You don't know the first thing about logistics or supply chains. You don't own Thorn Logistics. Judge Halloway peered over his spectacles, his expression unamused. Mr. Thorn, silence. I am reviewing the documents submitted by the defense. For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound was the rustling of paper. Jessica Vance shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her white suit suddenly looking less like a power move and more like a costume. She leaned toward Marcus, her voice a sharp whisper. Marcus, what is going on? Why does she have those lawyers? You said she was a nobody. She is a nobody, Marcus hissed, though sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. It's a trick, a clerical error. I signed 1,000 papers when we started. She probably slipped something in. A clerical error? Arthur Penhaligon's voice boomed from the other table. He didn't even look up from his notes. Mr. Thorn, you are accusing the Sterling Trust of fraud. That is a bold strategy. The notary who witnessed the signing of the intellectual property assignment is present. Perhaps you remember Mr. Abernathy. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. An elderly man with a cane walked in. Marcus's face drained of color. George Abernathy was his father's old lawyer, a man of impeccable reputation. Marcus remembered the day clearly now. The day he thought he was signing tax shelters. He had been too busy popping a bottle of Dom Perignon to read the fine print. Judge Halloway looked up. The documentation appears pristine. According to this, the Sterling Trust owns the Thorn 9 algorithm, the branding rights, and the client database. Thorn Logistics is merely an operating entity that leases these assets. The judge turned his gaze to Marcus. It seems, Mr. Thorn, that you are the CEO of a shell. You drive the car, but Ms. Sterling owns the engine, the wheels, and the fuel. But I built it, Marcus shouted, standing up, knocking his chair over. I spent 10 years flying to Tokyo, to London, to Berlin. I shook the hands. I made the deals. You performed your duties as an employee, Viviane said. Her voice was calm, cutting through his hysteria. And you were paid handsomely for it. A salary of $2 million a year, plus bonuses. You spent it all, of course, on cars, on gambling, on consultants. She glanced at Jessica. I demand a recess. Barry, Marcus's lawyer, squeaked, realizing he was out of his depth. Denied, Judge Halloway said. We are discussing the division of assets. Mr. Penhaligon, what is the position of the trust regarding the divorce? Arthur Penhaligon stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, Since the prenuptial agreement states that parties keep their own separate property, Ms. Sterling has no claim to Mr. Thorne's personal bank accounts or his wardrobe. However, she is hereby exercising the termination for cause clause within the licensing agreement between the trust and the company. Marcus felt the room spin. Termination? You can't shut down the company. We have contracts. We aren't shutting down the company, Penhaligon corrected. We are terminating the CEO. The licensing agreement stipulates that the CEO must maintain a moral standing to protect the brand. Adultery, public scandal, and financial mismanagement, specifically using company funds for personal affairs, are grounds for immediate removal. You can't fire me, Marcus roared. I am Thorne. Actually, Vivian said, standing up slowly. She walked towards Fürst the bench, her movements graceful and predatory. The name Thorne is a trademark owned by the trust. You can't even use your own last name for business purposes without my permission, Marcus. She turned to face him. The look in her eyes wasn't hate. It was pity, and that hurt him more than rage ever could. You wanted a divorce, Marcus. You wanted to cut ties. I'm just giving you what you asked for. Total separation. Judge Halloway banged his gavel. In light of this evidence, the court orders a temporary freeze on all assets of Thorne Logistics to prevent capital flight, pending a forensic audit requested by the trust. Mr. Thorne, you are restrained from entering the premises of the company headquarters until the audit is complete. This is insane, Marcus screamed. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his holster. Come on, Marcus. Jessica grabbed his arm, her nails digging in. We need to go. Now! They stumbled out of the courtroom, a flurry of media flashbulbs blinding them. Marcus shielded his eyes, expecting the reporters to ask about his expansion plans. Instead, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal shoved a microphone in his face. Mr. Thorne, is it true that your wife has been the secret majority shareholder for a decade? Is it true you're being investigated for embezzlement? No comment, Jessica shrieked, shoving the microphone away. They reached Marcus's Aston Martin, a company lease, parked at the curb. Marcus fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking violently. Give me the keys, Jessica snapped, snatching them. She drove them away, peeling out into traffic. Inside the car, the silence was toxic. Marcus stared out the window, his mind racing. She's bluffing. She has to be. Vivian doesn't have the stomach for this. She's soft. I just need to get back to the office, get the hard drives, and start over. I'll crush her. So, Jessica said, her voice icy. You don't own it? It's a legal technicality, Jess. Don't worry, I'll fix it. You told me you were worth $3 billion, she said, staring straight ahead at the road. I am the value. The code is nothing without me. The code is the product, Marcus, she said, turning a sharp corner. You're just the salesman. God, I should have known. You were too desperate to impress me. Watch your mouth, Marcus snapped. I'm still the man who bought you that Cartier bracelet. Which the court just said was bought with embezzled funds, Jessica retorted. They're going to come for it. They're going to come for everything. Marcus didn't answer. He pulled out his phone to call his chief financial officer, Timothy. The line rang once, then clicked. We're sorry. The number you have reached is no longer in service. He tried the VP of operations, straight to voicemail. He tried his personal assistant, a loyal woman named Beatrice, who had been with him for 5 years. Mr. Thorne? Beatrice's voice was shaky. Beatrice, listen to me. I need you to go into my office, open the safe behind the painting, and get the portable hard drives. Bring them to me at the hotel. I can't, sir. What do you mean you can't? I'm your boss. Not anymore, sir, Beatrice whispered. Miss Sterling is here. She's in your office. She's holding a staff meeting." Marcus dropped the phone. It slid between the seats, lost in the darkness, much like his life. Vivian Sterling stood at the head of the boardroom table on the 40th floor of the Thorn Tower. The view of Manhattan was breathtaking, a sprawling grid of lights and power. She had never liked this room. Marcus had decorated it with aggressive art, bulls, storms, battles. It was a room designed to intimidate. Around the table sat the 12 executives of Thorn Logistics. They looked terrified. They had known Vivian only as the quiet wife who sometimes showed up to holiday parties. They had no idea they were looking at the architect of their careers. "Please, sit," Vivian said. Her voice was soft, but it carried an authority that Marcus's shouting never had. The executives sat. Timothy, the CFO, looked like he was about to be sick. "I know this is a shock," Vivian began. "For 10 years, I remained in the shadows because I believed Marcus needed to feel independent to succeed. I let him play king while I built the kingdom. But a king who steals from the treasury and insults the crown can no longer rule." She pressed a button on the table. A holographic projection of the company's financials appeared in the center of the air. "As of this morning, I have executed the Sterling Protocol," she said. "The Thorn 9 algorithm has been remotely locked. No shipments move without a new encryption key." "But the perishable goods in transit," the VP of Logistics stammered. "We have millions in seafood in the Atlantic." "The key has already been updated for all active shipments," Vivian assured him. "I wrote the patch myself last night. Operations will continue seamlessly. However, we are making leadership changes." She looked at Timothy. "Timothy, you authorized personal expenses for Marcus, totaling $4 million over the last 2 years. The penthouse renovations, the jewelry, the private jets to Cabo." "He told me it was for client retention," Timothy cried. "Jessica Vance is not a client," Vivian said dryly. "You are fired, Timothy. Security will escort you out. Your severance is contingent on your full cooperation with the forensic audit." 2 large security guards stepped forward. Timothy didn't argue. He slumped and let them lead him away. The room was deathly quiet. "Does anyone else wish to leave?" Vivian asked. No one moved. "Good. Then let's get to work. We have a company to salvage." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus and Jessica were in a hotel room, a standard room, because Marcus's credit cards had been declined at the Four Seasons. Marcus was pacing, fueled by a manic energy. "She can't lock me out. I know the override codes, I just need to get to a terminal." "You're banned from the building, Marcus," Jessica said, sitting on the bed, scrolling through job listings on her phone. "I don't need to go to the building. I can access the server from the backup site in Jersey. It's an old warehouse. No one goes there. The servers are legacy, but they have a back door." He grabbed his coat. "I'm going to Jersey. I'll download the source code, wipe the main servers, and hold the company hostage. If she wants a war, I'll burn the whole thing down." Jessica looked up. A strange light flickered in her eyes. "Burn it down?" "Metaphorically. I'll leverage the code. She'll have to pay me $50 million just to turn the lights back on. And if you get caught, I won't. I'm the genius, remember?" Marcus grinned, but it looked more like a rictus of fear. "Are you coming?" Jessica hesitated. She looked at the cheap hotel room, then at Marcus's desperate face. She calculated the odds. If he succeeded, they were rich again. If he failed well, she needed an exit strategy. "I'll stay here," she said. "I'll monitor the news, coordinate with whoever picks up the phone." Fine. Keep your phone on. Marcus kissed her hurriedly and ran out at the door. As soon as he was gone, Jessica dialed a number. Vanguard Legal, a receptionist answered. Put me through to Vivian Sterling, Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly. Tell her I have information about a security breach. Tell her Marcus is going to the Jersey server farm. Jessica wasn't loyal. She was a survivor, and she knew a sinking ship when she saw one. The drive to New Jersey was a blur of rain and red taillights. Marcus drove the Aston Martin aggressively, his knuckles white. He was operating on pure adrenaline and spite. He arrived at the old warehouse in Newark. It was a brick relic from the early days of the company, before the glass towers and the fame. He parked the car in the shadows and approached the side door. He punched in the code, 110580. His birthday. The keypad buzzed red. Access denied. Damn it, he cursed. He tried again. Access denied. She changed the codes, he muttered. He looked around. There was a window on the second floor, slightly ajar. He found a crate, dragged it over, and awkwardly climbed up. He was panting, his expensive Italian suit tearing on the rough brick. He squeezed through the window and fell onto the dusty floor of the server room. The room was humming with the sound of cooling fans. Rows of black towers stood like sentinels in the dark, blinking with green lights. Marcus rushed to the main console. He typed furiously. Override command. Root access. Admin. The screen flashed. Password required. He typed his old password. King Thorn 1. Incorrect. He tried Vivian's birthday. Incorrect. He slammed his fist on the keyboard. Then a text box appeared on the screen. It wasn't a system error. It was a chat window. User admin is typing. Marcus froze. The text appeared. Hello, Marcus. I was wondering when you would try the Jersey back door. Marcus stared at the screen. He typed back. Vivian, you can't stop me. I built this system. User admin. You built the interface. I built the security. You're trespassing. Trespassing, Marcus? Marcus. I'm taking what's mine. I'm initiating the wipe sequence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. It contained a virus he had bought on the dark web years ago, an insurance policy he never thought he'd use. If he couldn't have the company, no one could. He plugged the drive into the USB port. User admin. Don't do it, Marcus. Once you execute that file, there is no going back. Watch me, Marcus whispered. He hit enter. The screen went black. Marcus laughed. Yes, it's done. The database is frying. Then the lights in the warehouse slammed on, blindingly bright. Step away from the console, a voice boomed. Marcus spun around. Standing in the doorway were 4 police officers, guns drawn. Behind them stood Arthur Penhaligon and Jessica. Jessica, Marcus gasped, raising his hands. What are you doing here? Jessica crossed her arms, refusing to meet his eyes. I cut a deal, Marcus. Immunity for testimony. I told them you were coming to sabotage the infrastructure. You traitor! Marcus screamed, lunging toward her. 2 officers tackled him to the ground. His face was pressed against the cold concrete floor, the same floor he had swept himself 15 years ago, when he was just a dreamer with a grand idea. Marcus Thorn, an officer recited, cuffing his hands behind his back. You are under arrest for corporate espionage, attempted destruction of private property, and trespassing. As they hauled him up, Arthur Penhaligon stepped forward. He held a tablet in his hand. By the way, Mr. Thorn, the lawyer said calmly. The virus didn't work. Ms. Sterling sandboxed the Jersey server an hour ago. You just uploaded your malware into a dummy drive. You destroyed nothing but your own defense. Marcus looked at the screen. The chat window was still open. User admin, checkmate. Marcus slumped in the officer's grip. The fight drained out of him. He looked at Jessica, who was already checking her makeup in the reflection of the glass door. "Why?" he croaked. "You were a bad investment, Marcus," she said simply. "And I don't hold on to depreciating assets." As they dragged him out into the rainy night, Marcus realized the cruelest irony of all. He had left his wife because he wanted a partner who was ruthless, ambitious, and business-minded. He had left Viviane to find someone like Viviane. But while Viviane used her power to build, he and Jessica had only used it to consume. And now, there was nothing left to eat. The holding cell at the Essex County Jail smelled of bleach and despair. For Marcus Thorne, a man who had spent the last decade inhaling the scent of Italian leather and aged Scotch, the sensory shock was almost as debilitating as the legal one. He sat on a cold metal bench, his bespoke suit ruined from the climb into the warehouse and the subsequent tackle by the police. He had been stripped of his tie and shoelaces. Suicide precautions, the intake officer had mumbled. Marcus looked down at his expensive loafers, now flopping open like dead fish. It was a humiliating metaphor for his entire existence. His lawyer, Arthur Penhaligon, did not visit him. Instead, a public defender named Gregson arrived 3 hours later. Gregson looked tired. He had a coffee stain on his shirt and carried a briefcase that had seen better decades. "Mr. Thorne," Gregson sighed, sitting on the plastic chair on the other side of the glass partition. "It doesn't look good." "Get me out on bail," Marcus demanded, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. "I have assets. I have properties." "You have nothing," Gregson corrected, shuffling papers. "I just spoke with the district attorney. All your personal accounts were frozen by the IRS this morning. Apparently, Sterling Trust handed over a dossier of your financials. You haven't paid personal income tax in 3 years. You were funneling company money into offshore accounts to hide it, and then spending it on, well, Ms. Vance." "Viviane did this," Marcus hissed. "She orchestrated this whole thing." "She merely reported a crime, Mr. Thorne. The forensic audit is damning. They found the receipts for the consulting fees paid to a shell company owned by Jessica Vance. $2 million labeled as marketing research. That's embezzlement." Marcus closed his eyes. The marketing research fund. It was how he had paid for Jessica's apartment, her car, her wardrobe. He thought he was being clever, hiding it in the massive operational budget of Thorne Logistics. He hadn't realized that Viviane, the silent owner, saw every line item. She had watched him steal from her for months, cataloging every theft, waiting for the moment it would hurt the most to reveal it. "And Jessica?" Marcus asked, a small, pathetic hope rising in his chest. "Has she been charged?" Gregson grimaced. "Ms. Vance has accepted a plea deal. She is the prosecution's star witness. She claims she was unaware the funds were embezzled. She says you manipulated her, told her you owned the company, and that she was a victim of your coercive control. She's painting you as a predator, Marcus." Marcus laughed. It was a raw, jagged sound. "A predator? She pursued me. She came on to me at the Christmas party." "It doesn't matter," Gregson said. "The narrative is set. She's the young, naive employee. You're the older, corrupt CEO who looted his wife's company to buy a Mistress. The jury is going to hate you before you even sit down." While Marcus rotted in the cell, Vivian Sterling was busy scrubbing the stain of his tenure from the glass walls of the skyscraper. She sat in the CEO's office, her office now. The aggressive bull paintings were gone, replaced by calm, abstract landscapes. The room felt lighter, breathable. Arthur Penhaligon sat across from her. "The board is stabilized," Arthur reported. "The stock took a hit when the arrest news broke, but it rebounded 12% this morning when you announced the rebranding." "Good," Vivian said, signing a stack of documents. "And the German expansion?" "Approved. The European Trade Commission was charmed by you. They prefer a CEO who actually understands the algorithm over one who just shouts about it." Vivian paused, her pen hovering over the paper. "It wasn't supposed to end like this, Arthur. I didn't want him in prison. I just wanted him gone." "He put himself in prison, Vivian," Arthur said gently. "You gave him an out. At the restaurant, you offered him a clean break. The townhouse, the stipend. He could have walked away. He chose war. He chose to try and destroy the servers." "I suppose," she murmured. She stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city looked different from here. For years, she had looked at it from the ground, looking up. Now, she was looking down. "There is one more thing," Arthur said, hesitating. "Jessica Vance gave an interview to the Daily Mail. She's trying to secure a book deal about her ordeal." Vivian turned, her expression unreadable. "Let her. Silence is the best response to a tantrum. If we sue her, we keep her relevant. If we ignore her, she disappears. People like Jessica feed on attention. Starve her." The trial, 6 months later, was a spectacle. Marcus looked gaunt. The stress had aged him 10 years. His hair, once dyed a rich chestnut, was now showing aggressive streaks of grey. He wore a cheap suit provided by the court. Jessica took the stand on the 3rd day. She wore a modest cardigan and glasses she didn't need, looking every bit the innocent victim. She cried on cue when the prosecutor asked about the money. "I didn't know," she sobbed into a tissue. "Marcus told me he was the owner. He said the money was his. I thought he loved me. I didn't know I was helping him steal from his wife. I would never do that." From the defense table, Marcus stared at her. He wanted to scream, to list the times she had asked for more jewelry, more trips, more power. But he remained silent. He realized now that Jessica didn't love anyone but herself. She was a mirror reflecting his own narcissism back at him. He had left a woman of substance for a woman of surface, and now that the surface was cracked, there was nothing underneath. When Vivian took the stand, the courtroom went silent. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She answered the questions with the precision of the coder she was. "Mrs. Sterling," the defense attorney asked, trying to find a wedge. "If you knew your husband was embezzling funds for months, why didn't you stop him earlier? Were you entraping him?" Vivian adjusted the microphone. "I was gathering evidence to protect the employees," she said calmly. "Accusing a CEO of embezzlement causes market panic. I needed to be certain, and I suppose a part of me hoped I was wrong. I hoped my husband was just a fool, not a criminal. Sadly, the data proved otherwise." The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts: embezzlement, corporate espionage, grand larceny. Judge Halloway, the same judge who had presided over the divorce hearing, looked down at Marcus during sentencing. "Mr. Thorne, you were given a life most people only dream of. You had a brilliant partner, a thriving company, and immense wealth. But your greed was a bottomless pit. You bit the hand that fed you, and then you tried to burn the house down. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison." As the bailiff led him away, Marcus looked back into the gallery. He saw Jessica checking her phone, already bored. Then he saw Viviane. She met his gaze. She didn't look triumphant. She looked resolved. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a final goodbye, and then turned her back to speak to her lawyers. The doors closed, and Marcus Thorne stepped out of the spotlight and into the dark. 5 years later. New York City moves fast. 5 years is an epoch. In that time, Thorne Logistics had been erased from memory. The company was now Sterling & Co., a global powerhouse in shipping and AI logistics. The Thorne 9 algorithm had been updated to the Sterling X, a system so efficient it was being licensed by governments. Viviane Sterling was no longer invisible. She was on the cover of Time magazine. The headline read, "The Quiet Architect, How Viviane Sterling Rewrote the Rules of Business." She sat in a private booth at the Gilded Lily, the same restaurant where her marriage had ended. She was celebrating the acquisition of a major competitor. "Another glass of champagne, Miss Sterling?" the waiter asked. "Yes, thank you," Viviane smiled. She looked across the table. Sitting opposite her was not a new husband, nor a business partner. It was Arthur Penhaligon. He had retired from law to become the chairman of her board. "You seem distracted," Arthur noted, swirling his wine. "I received a letter today," Viviane admitted, "from the parole board. Marcus is being released early for good behavior. Overcrowding." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Are you worried?" "No," Viviane said honestly. "I'm just remembering. It feels like a story I read in a book, not a life I lived." "He has nothing, you know," Arthur said. "Jessica spent her book advance in a year and is now selling diet tea on social media. Marcus is a felon with millions in debt to the IRS. He's unhireable." "I know," Viviane said. She took a sip of champagne. "I don't wish him harm, Arthur. I just wish him perspective." The streets of Queens were wet with rain. Marcus Thorne stepped off the bus, pulling his collar up against the chill. He wore a grey windbreaker and work boots. He had aged 20 years in the last 5. His arrogance had been sanded down by the friction of prison life. He walked to a small, run-down diner on the corner. He had a job interview for a dishwasher position. It was the only place that didn't ask for a background check. He sat at the counter, counting the crumpled bills in his pocket. Enough for a coffee, but not a sandwich. On the television mounted in the corner, a news segment was playing. And in business news, Sterling & Co. announced record profits today. CEO Viviane Sterling has pledged $50 million to a new scholarship fund for women in technology. Marcus looked up. There she was, on the screen. She looked radiant. Older, yes, but stronger. She wore a white suit, ironically similar to the one Jessica had worn to court, but on Viviane, it looked like armor, not a costume. The reporter asked her a question. "Miss Sterling, you built this empire from the ashes of a public scandal. What is the secret to your resilience?" Viviane smiled at the camera. "I learned that true power isn't about how loud you shout or how much you own. It's about knowing your worth when everyone else refuses to see it. I spent years building a foundation while someone else took credit for the facade. When the facade fell, the foundation held. That is the secret. Build something real, and you never have to fear the storm." Marcus stared at the screen. The coffee in front of him had gone cold. "Hey, buddy," the diner manager shouted from the kitchen. "You here for the dishwasher job?" Marcus looked away from the TV. He looked at his rough hands. He thought about the penthouse. He thought about the sea bass he didn't eat. He thought about the envelope he had handed her. "Yes," Marcus said, his voice quiet. "I'm here for the job." "All right. Grab an apron. Back is piled up." Marcus Thorne, the man who once moved the world, walked into the kitchen to scrub grease off cheap plates. As he worked, the steam rising around him, he realized the ultimate twist of his life. He had spent 10 years thinking he was the protagonist of the story. He thought Viviane was a supporting character, an extra. But he was wrong. He was just the villain in her origin story. And villains, eventually, are defeated so the hero can rise. He scrubbed a plate, rinsing it clean. For the first time in his life, he was doing honest work. And strangely, as the hot water burned his hands, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in the penthouse. He felt real. Miles away, in the penthouse that was now truly hers, Viviane walked out onto the balcony. The wind whipped her hair. She looked out at the city lights, millions of them, glowing like stars. She took out her phone. She had one unread message. It was from an unknown number. "I saw you on the news. You look happy. I'm sorry." Viviane looked at the message for a long time. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel sadness. She felt a profound, peaceful indifference. She didn't reply. She simply deleted the message, put the phone down, and turned her face toward the wind. The king was gone. Long live the queen. And that is the tragic, satisfying fall of Marcus Thorne. He learned the hard way that when you marry a woman for her silence, you should make sure she isn't quietly building the cage you're about to step into. Viviane didn't just win the divorce. She won the war before Marcus even knew a shot had been fired. She proved that dignity and intelligence will always outlast arrogance and greed. Marcus ended up scrubbing plates, while the wife he called invisible became the face of the future. If you enjoyed this story of karma and ultimate revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never underestimate the quiet ones. And if you want more stories of betrayal, twists, and justice served, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching.